There have been a lot of questions recently about the Habs' goaltending depth, and we're going to go into a couple 20-year-old CHL standouts that the Habs could target either at the draft or after they pass through the draft in free agency. We'll be discussing that, plus Martin St. Louis sheds some light on his very unique relationship with Kent Hughes, and finally we'll be talking about the Habs using a bit of a loophole in the CBA to hold on to one of their goalie prospects, so you won't want to miss this edition of Habs Digest. Hello, bonjour, ahoy, and welcome to today's news edition of Habs Digest. I'm your host, Josh Gosse, alongside my co-host, Jesse Poirier. And quickly, before we get into the video, a quick reminder, as always, that about 70% of you guys who are watching, at least in the last month, aren't subscribed. So if you're watching our videos every time we post them, you like the content we're putting out, just hit the button. It's pretty easy. And hit the bell, too. You'll get notified every single time we post about Habs news. Jesse, let's get into our first topic today. And the first topic is talking about the Habs goalie situation, again, because it's a point of concern, really, at this point. There's a couple goalies in the CHL that Marco D'Amico has mentioned he's been getting a lot of questions on about maybe potential targets for the Habs this summer. And let's talk about it. So first of all, we have William Rousseau and Thomas Milic. William Rousseau is a goalie from Quebec playing for the Quebec Ramparts, currently in the Memorial Cup. Thomas Milic, the same thing, except playing for the Seattle Thunderbirds, and they're two 20-year-old undrafted goalies. And because of the way the rules are written, basically, since they're playing North American hockey and they started before the age of 20, they still have to pass through this draft until they're unrestricted free agents, when sometimes, if you're international, you can be an unrestricted free agent at this age. And the Habs have had a bit of a history of drafting 20-year-olds at the draft table with Miguel Tourigny, Jared Davidson, Xavier Simoneau, and even Raphael Harvey-Pinard. They were all selected as 20-year-olds. So, Jesse, before we get into the stats of Rousseau and Milic, do you think that the Habs could potentially target these guys in the draft, or maybe after, or do you think that one of these guys could even be a good fit in the system? Give me your thoughts, because they have been playing out of their minds recently.
Yeah, whether it's at the draft or afterwards, absolutely. We've seen both of these goalies back up their teams to burst in the Memorial Cup, playing great. So, to be honest, I don't know about you, Josh, but I'm kind of excited about this news because I feel like it's a really important area for the team to address. And I think getting somebody a little bit young, but maybe around the 20-year-old age, it's young, but it's not too young. As we know, goalies need time to develop, but I think it kind of goes with our young core as well. So I think it would really fit the timeline nicely, and I'm a big fan of both these players.
Yeah, let's dive in a bit first to William Rousseau, who just actually lost his first game in the Memorial Cup. I believe it was his first loss. I could be wrong. But anyway, at the hands of Owen Beck and the Peterborough Petes. But he's been pretty good. By QMJHL standards, a .908 save percentage in the regular season, .915 in the playoffs so far, 2.22 goals against average in the Q, where scoring can get very, very high, is quite impressive. And another thing, Jesse, if we look at that list of players the Habs have drafted as 20-year-olds, you see some Quebec names in there. So, I mean, would it surprise you if they took a guy who's playing for the Quebec Ramparts? He's 6'1", has shown plenty of potential, like maybe as a 5th or 6th round pick, because that's seemingly where they've been going after their goalies, at least in recent years.
I think it's definitely worth a pick. And if you look at the history of recent drafts, you can get really good goalies around these sort of ranges. In fact, it happens every year. So, he's not a huge guy, Rousseau, at 6'1". So I wonder if maybe this is part of the reason why he hasn't got drafted yet. But I'm wondering if as time goes on, we've seen size become less of a factor, first with forwards, then with defensemen, right? Mm-hmm. But with goalies, that seems to be the last stalwarts because size is almost everything for goalies. A lot of GMs just like to bet on size. 6'4", okay numbers, the juniors. Yeah, let's take a rider on him for sure. I'm wondering, though, if maybe some of these smaller but still athletic guys start to get some shots more going forward.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think 6'1" would be tied for the shortest goalie in the NHL today. And speaking of guys who aren't that big, if we take a look at Milic, who has way better numbers. I mean, in the WHL, 2.08 GAA in the regular season, .928 save percentage, 1.95 GAA in 19 playoff games with a .933. But he's only 6'1", 179. I mean, he's really not a big guy either. Got great hair though. But again, you're very right, Jesse. You gotta wonder, small goalies don't really make the NHL anymore. There's really not that many small guys. So unless these guys grow, and at the age of 20, it's really not that likely. So I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if small goalies maybe got a bit more of a shot going forward, but regardless, these guys are two guys that, at least for depth purposes for Montreal, you got to think maybe having for the AHL or the ECHL, whatever ends up happening, because they only have 4 goalies right now in their whole system, it could be worth looking into. Let's talk about topic number 2 today, Jesse, and I want to get your opinion on this really quick as soon as we show it, because we got a kind of a hilarious thing here. On Spit and Chicklets recently, Martin St. Louis said, Kent and I go way back. He's 5 years older than me. He went to Middlebury. I went to Vermont. He used to be my camp counselor for a couple summers back in Montreal. We were acquaintances for a long time. We became close friends. This whole interview was hilarious. I suggest you guys go watch it. Marty's a great guy. But Jesse, I was caught off guard a bit by this. Well, what do you think about this relationship? And do you think that's maybe even beneficial for the organization?
That's hilarious. I knew they were buddies, but I didn't know they were sitting around a fire making s'mores and going on hikes together and everything else. Like it's pretty funny, right? We do that in the hockey world, that it's a small world, but it seems even more so. So I mean, it's great because as an organization, as we talk about all the time on the show, just like what a great culture that the Montreal Canadiens have. What a great environment it is. So it seems now we're seeing some of these reasons why, right? It's obviously Kent has a relationship with Jeff, and obviously Martin has a relationship. They just seem to all know each other. Obviously with Martin St. Louis there, we have this like Cavalier as well. Just so it's really a family affair here with the team. Kind of great to hear, and it definitely shows.
And I mean, that's one theme you see a lot in successful organizations. When you look across all sports, right? Like, for example, the Spurs dynasty in basketball, the Patriots dynasty in football. You get this kind of sense that a lot of the guys on the team, just not just the players, but the coaches, the management, everyone just feels like one big group, one big family. And that chemistry, that cohesion often leads to success. And, I think to me, that's just a really, really good sign. Like you said, when you see this kind of championship type of environment from your organization.
That's so true. To be honest, and that's what we're building towards as well. So it's important to not just kind of be able to be on the ice, but also to have those relationships off the ice as well, right? Just that goes so much into how you're playing, just what the environment is. As we've seen, the type of coach that has a big effect on how the players play and everything. And I think it just helps so much when you're just really having, just that great camaraderie, not only with the players, but I think like with the management is often where it matters most in those key decision-making positions.
Yeah, for sure. All right, let's get into our final thing, and we're kind of going to stick on the topic of management for a bit. Now, look, I use the word loophole. I've seen people like on Twitter use the word loophole, and I don't know if it's the most accurate thing, but the Habs used specific writing of the CBA to hold on to one of their prospects, and as I mentioned in yesterday's video, they ended up not wanting to keep Frederic Dichaud. I think Dichaud's how you pronounce it. I think I pronounced it more Decow. I don't really know, but anyway, you guys correct us. But an interesting thing, the Habs had another goalie, Joe Vrbetic, down in the ECHL, playing mostly with the Trois-Rivières Lyon. And let's just take a look at this. Talking about Joe Vrbetic, who we thought the Habs would not be able to keep, but according to clause 8.6.2 of the NHL CBA, he actually is eligible to have his rights extended because he left Major Junior a year early. So if you're drafted as an 18-year-old, which Joe Vrbetic was, and you don't play in juniors in the second league year after you were drafted, the Habs in this case, or the team, actually gets them until the 4th June 1st, following their initial selection. So, be put simply, because he jumped to the pros, the ECHL, at the age of 19, just 1 year removed from his draft year, he left Major Junior, that actually gives the organization extra time to control him. So, Jesse, I'm gonna ask you this. Do you think the Habs sort of did this intentionally? Just because they knew this, I'm sure they did. But second of all, Joe Vrbetic, do you think he maybe has any kind of future with the Habs? We haven't heard a whole lot from him. I actually watched him play in the ECHL in Newfoundland, but he's an interesting guy. Do you think there's any reason they maybe decided to keep him over someone like Dichaud, who maybe has better numbers?
Yeah, I think this was a great call from the Habs, all things considered. It was an interesting decision, though, because Frederic Dichaud did have better numbers than Joe Vrbetic, this past year. And definitely even playing at a little bit of a higher level as well. That being said, what I like about this news, Josh, is it seems like they're trying to be a little bit more competitive now with their roster spots. And that's why I think they're going to really try, to our earlier point, to go for a goalie, whether it's at the draft or afterwards, because they chose not to use one of those roster spots on Dach when very much they could have. And the reason that they went with Vrbetic is because they have a little bit of that flexibility where they don't need to give him one of those roster spots while still giving them time to develop. So to answer your second point is I think that question's still up in the air, and that's why I think this is a wise decision. It's like we still want that depth and we need it, but we want to start becoming more competitive, and we need to be very selective about how many NHL deals that we give out. Of course, that we only have so many. So for me, I kind of low-key like this because for me, it's signaling that we're going to start becoming more competitive as we're becoming more selective with our roster spots. So that's the next step in the rebuild.
I think that's an awesome point. Yeah, he doesn't use one of the NHL roster spots while Vrbetic would, or while Dach would. That's an excellent point that I didn't mention. Yeah, like it's very interesting because we know the Habs have so many guys who could potentially eat up these NHL roster spots and so many guys they could go get, right? There's so much opportunity for this organization to grow, and like you said, these roster spots are incredibly valuable. So I'm in agreement with you fully. I think you made some amazing points. I think it's an awesome move. Very underrated, subtle move when a lot of people maybe thought Dach was better. Vrbetic has potential to be okay. He's still very young. So anyway, he'll be a very interesting story to follow. But that'll do it for this news edition of Habs Digest. If you enjoyed, leave a like, comment, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell to not miss any of our newest Habs news and updates. I'm your host, Josh Goss, for my co-host, Jesse Poirier. We'll catch you in the next one.